Started. Um, so first, I actually I'm recording this lecture, so probably other student or the incoming future students, they can take a look at it. So also when you make comments, you want to be aware this is recording, okay? So first off, congratulations, you guys finished your finals, your semester, and it's summertime to recharge yourself, to learn some new things. Then let's start from this one. I'm Professor Han Liu from Electrical Computer Engineering of Stevens Institute of Technology. A couple of you guys have been in my class, CPE 517 before, so you should be familiar with me. And if you are interested in doing research, you can also check out my website. All right, so I guess there's more people coming. So let's get started. So the talk today is about some guidance for junior researchers or for some researchers who did some research and who want to figure out a systematic guideline for your follow-up research task. Okay, so before I give a talk today, I actually did a little bit of Google, because for my understanding, I think research is defined in the bottom right. It's called repeated search. When we talk about these two words, it gives you an impression about being persistent, being curious, being critical, because you want to repeatedly searching it, right? So it means you have to be very critical and not being satisfied about whatever you searched just now. But I think it's not, we cannot just be satisfied about my own feeling because I just been doing research for a decade. I think there's other better researchers who define what is a research. I find a couple of them, and I think this one is something pretty formal. It's saying it's a process of steps that are used to collect and analyze information to increase our understanding of a topic or issue, right? So it's a couple of steps you need to use. You have to both collect or learn from the history, as well as do your research or do your analyze to get some new understanding or to increase your understanding of a topic. That's how we typically say it's research. It's really just about pretty much two things. It's standing on the shoulder of the history and create new things based upon understanding or analyzing of the new thing, of the old things. Okay, so if you go to my definition, which is saying repeated search, and then there's a very important element or factor in research, that's about time. Believe it or not, I think this is the only resource that we are fair. Everybody has the same amount of second. Every second is the same, right? 24 hours is the same for everybody sitting in the room, in this virtual room. So how to properly manage your time is important. Why we do time management? From my perspective, it's more about making me concentrated. Okay, so that means I'm not being distracted by so many tasks. Using myself as an example, I have to teach. I have to, help my student. I have like more than 10 students. If I have to meet every student for 10 minutes, it's around 2 hours. Then I have to teach. I typically spend 1.5 days to prepare the literature, to prepare the slides, the source code, etc. And then I have to also write papers. I have to read papers. I have to interact with my family. So my time is pretty limited. I have so many tasks in front of me. If I didn't have a proper management, then I'm gonna be distracted. I'm gonna worry about, oh, when I gonna do this, when I gonna do that, right? So when you have a proper time management, you're gonna always say, don't worry about it. I have the time allocated for this. I have the time allocated for that. So I can concentrate on this work by myself. So by stay focused, I think everybody knows when you are focused, you are more productive, you are more creative, and you're actually a lot of times feeling less tired than being distracted. Well, like we have every person has different preferences for a lot of things. Similarly for time, I'm a learning person, so what I typically do is I put the most important thing, or the most creative thing, or most critical thing in the morning, such as writing, such as reading very important things, such as thinking about a very critical problem. And then after lunch, I sort of getting dizzy, so I arrange some less critical things or more passive involvement of myself in the afternoon, such as meeting with my students or giving some feedback to something that does not need a lot of involvement of myself, or just to try to do fan chatting with my students or my peers. Sometimes during lunch, sometimes just, we are from Stevens. I think majority of you guys are from Stevens here. So we have gorgeous views across the river. So I can also arrange a little bit of random walk along the Hudson River, just to think about something, right? And then for every week, I prefer to allocate around 1-2 hours to read papers. No matter how busy I am, I'm doing proposal writing, paper writing, fighting for deadlines. I'm gonna always have to, and I want to read 2 papers to understand what's going on there in the field. Another thing I feel super beneficial is about using 1 hour to purely thinking about whatever I think is critical. It's just 1 hour, you use it, or it's not a lot of time, but if you use it properly, it can be a relay of your thoughts. After 1 year, you're probably gonna be much higher than what you thought before because of this 1 year pure thinking. For a very long period of time, I like to write a diary to log in some interesting things, some, the ideas I produced from that 1 hour of thinking. Well, sometimes I update the slides here. This is an active slide project, so it's keep updated. Okay, this is a little bit of time management. I think you guys have your own perspective. But let's stay with this and go to more pretty technical, specific, rigorous details. So doing research is more of reading, writing, presenting, and creating. So we have to be very clear that these 4 tasks are atomic. Okay. If some of you are already a PhD student or have some experience about research, you're always gonna know that being creative means you have to read papers, right? Because you're gonna have to be sort of inspired, or there are, like, you need a trigger to trigger you to think, to trigger you to be creative. And then that's reading. And then as a product, you have to write something, or you have to verify you are creating some real things. So that's why you have to write or present. Present is the same as writing, but one is like writing in the paper, another is presenting in the slides. It's pretty much similar. If you know, well, another thing very interesting I want to share with you guys is, if you feel you're not good at writing, the easiest way for you to fix it is you just read whatever you write out loud. Right? You read it out loud, you will figure out your writing is pretty bad. If you read it out loud and you figure out it's pretty fluent and natural, that means your writing is okay. I'm going to talk about more skills. You guys probably can also take some notes if you feel it's interesting, or some questions, write it down. We're going to have another 5 to 10 minutes discussion if needed later by the end of this talk. How do we effectively read a paper? It's, if you are a junior or fresh start guy, you might feel reading a paper is pretty hard, because it's typically in our field, computer engineering related field, it's typically double column, 10 to 15 pages. It's very long. 50 references, 20 figures, a lot of things. Well, in that sense, I want to tell you one thing. We are researchers, we are not writers. In that sense, it means our writing are not creative. It's our content, our ideas that are creative. But in terms of the format of writing, the style of writing, we are pretty much similar. No matter it's from system conferences and database conferences, high performance computing conferences, they are very similar. It's pretty much like they have to have an abstract, an introduction, background, related work, a couple of techniques, experiments, conclusion. That's the very high level like structure. Even instead of every single section, they are very similar. For example, in abstract, which once you read abstract, you should be able to understand pretty much the paper if you are an expert in the field. So in abstract, one sentence must be background, one sentence must be problem, and then it could be one or two. And then you have the contributions, that's to solve the problems, right? And then you have the evaluations to evidence your contribution are effective, and some concluding sentence. All of them are the same. Once you know this, then when you are reading papers, you know your expectation. It's like, if you know what you are expecting, it's much, much easier for you to understand a paper instead of you know nothing. For example, if I tell you today's talk is about how to do research, then you expect I'm going to talk about how to do research. It's much, much easier comparing to you don't know what's going on there, right? It's pretty much the same for every single corner of the work, not just research. When it goes to introduction, it's an extension of abstract, which means if it's one sentence of background in abstract, you typically have 1 or 2 paragraphs of background in introduction. If you have a problem over there in abstract, it must have a couple of paragraphs talking about the problem. The problem can be, it's a pure problem, or it can be a challenge that's faced by majority of the related work. And then it's very natural. I talked about a problem, I talked about background, I talked about a problem, then it's very natural for me to motivate my stuff. So that's one overview of the system. And then once you have the overview, it's also pretty natural for us to extend over the overview, one technique, a paragraph, and then organization of the paper. Techniques, it's extension of every paragraph of the introduction, right? Experiments, it's similar. You have the techniques, then you want to have the evidence to show that they are effective, efficient, or whatever you want to prove. Then that's the evaluation. So it's something very natural. It's not they're trying to confuse you. It's they're trying to make sense of it. Okay. So that's the flow of the paper. Okay. All of those things we talked about are about styles. But what's the meat? What's the most important thing about paper, about research? It's about new ideas. It's about, you know, the first guy who invented computers. It's about the first one who figured out using magnetics can produce electricity. It's about those new ideas. You don't have to use the paper to write it. You can already speak out. It's the idea, right? So here, then how could you come up with interesting, like bright or eye-catching ideas? A lot of times, unfortunately, not every research can produce groundbreaking ideas. And me neither. I'm not a, like, I would say, if I'm not, but I would say even in the Albert Einstein, they are not starting to create groundbreaking ideas from very beginning, right? So ideas can come from, at the very beginning, being very incremental, being not satisfied to whatever exists. When I'm reading a paper, I want to say, no, this paper is not good. No, this have, you know, a couple of shortcomings. That means you are creating something that's standing on the shoulder of what you read. We see those kind of ideas are incremental. So you read something, you sort of being criticizing the things you read, and then because you criticize it, that means you're also confident about it, you can make it better. So that's climbing on the shoulder of those papers you read. Or it can be interdisciplinary. For example, whatever you learned from, let's say, biology, how the bird is flying. You apply that to mechanical engineering to invent the airplane, right? It's borrowing something. When you borrow it from one place to another place, if you do the identical borrow, there's no contribution. But unfortunately, or fortunately, there's no way that you can apply an identical idea from one place to another place. It's gonna work. Still using the bird example, you figure out the bird can fly, but you cannot apply the identical idea of a bird to the airplane. The changes are the ideas, are the technical contributions, right? Or it can be implementation analysis. You have an idea, you have the incremental things out, then you implement it. When you implement it, you get it to work, you will figure out, oh, I just built an airplane that's the same as the bird. It will not automatically fly because it does not have energy. You need fuel, you need engine, you need a lot of things. So when you implement it, you get your hands dirty, then you know more about the problem, and then you can come up with more contributions. Well, a lot of things I'm talking about today is more about system research, which is what I am good at. But when it goes to mathematical things or something totally different from this domain, it might vary. But if you think about what I told you, it works in my context though. Or computer engineering, pretty much it works. It can be discussion. That's why I typically talk to my student. So when the student talks to advisor, they come from different background, different perspective. They might question each other. It's clear if you can predict whatever your advisor is questioning you, it's impossible, right? So it must you must have something that you never thought about, because you have two brains here. Previously, you just have yourself a single brain. So two brains definitely have more things. Okay, so when you guys trying to defend, trying to either defend or criticizing or questioning, you need some new things to come out to cover those kind of new points. Or you can get a inspiration from audience at large through conferences, work in progress, or WIP, result to the audience. Or it can be coming from your prior project. Or in another sense, we're never gonna be the guy who is always reading papers, inventing it, and then criticizing them, and then inventing our new things. The first project typically is by reading other guys' papers, but the second project often is when you're doing your first project. If you've been pretty persistent, you spend a lot of time, you're gonna have a lot of things coming out. So the things that you didn't publish in your first paper are gonna be left out for your second paper. And when you're standing on that shoulder, it's your own stuff, then that's coming from the prior project. Well, it can also coming from nowhere, which everybody shared common sense knows what's going on. So I don't have to explain what's that. Okay, writing papers. I don't know how many of you are PhD student in the group, or I would think all of you guys are master students, excluding some of you are seniors, excluding, I think Nina is also there. She's not a student. So, okay, anyway. So, if you are a PhD student or you are a researcher, you must know that writing a paper probably is the most challenging task. It's not one of, it's the single most challenging task. No matter you're from like native speaking country or not. So the reason is that writing a paper is like it's you are the single one who is writing paper, but it's 10 to 15 pages. It's a lot of things, and it's hard for you to make sense of those many ideas. Okay, but today I get you guys here not to to say this is impossible, right? So why people publish papers? Why papers are out there? There must be some secret recipes or some things that we can share. So here, using the quote I got from nowhere, I wish I could whisper you the secret recipe towards an elegant writing. Unfortunately, I failed. The only way I found beneficial is to not try to combine idea writing and polishing together. In that sense, it means when you're writing, you probably can first try to dump your ideas out in a quite ugly or sometimes modest way of writing. And then you can polish your writing later via repeated writing. So this is the same. So you can see that research, repeat it. You just have to do it again and again. You might feel, as a junior guy, you might feel, writing is a single shot, right? I write it, that's it. If I keep rewriting, what could I produce? It's just the things I wrote before. Unfortunately, that's wrong. Okay, so writing a lot of times produce new ideas because you don't get yourself involved in the implementation details, and you become very critical about your own writing. So if you can be repeated writing, you want to be one more thing. That's, you think like an audience. If you still remember, when you are reading a paper, we've talked about it before, what are you expecting? You expect the paper to have one sentence of background, one sentence of problem, one sentence of overview, three sentences of three contributions, one sentence of evaluation, and one sentence of conclusion. You do the same. Do yourself a favor, right? Think like an audience. But a lot of times we cannot because we have the background over there. For example, because I am the professor, so I feel I'm a professor. So when I'm talking, I always have that background. How could I forget about I'm the professor? I can do that. It's easy. For example, if I get up in the morning, I feel I'm just myself. It's the same here, right? When you have a long time of distracted to other things like sleeping or travel or hard working, exercise, you tend to forget about, tend to have a breakup from whatever you have been very sticky, very involved into. At that moment, you are the audience of yourself, of that paper, because when that moment happens, when you read the paper, you're gonna figure out a lot of bugs. It's hard. It's the grass, it's the single silver bullet, or the single very, very precious moment of time in your daily life. But if you grasp that one, use that one to be your own audience, that would be very helpful. If you cannot do that, it's also okay. You can find a good friend. You can find a mama. You can find whoever you trust. You ask them to read the paper. Don't worry. Don't think, oh, okay, I'm doing something very technical. Could they understand it? I'm telling you the truth. If your paper is very well written, they can understand it. There's other things, such as being picky, which means when you figure out one hiccup, don't let it go. Because if you feel it's very confusing, it's absolutely must be very super 100 times more confusing for the reviewers. I think that's pretty much about this. Other things you guys can take a look at it. It's a lot of bullet. Here's something you guys pretty much, all of you guys have to do in this summer. How to start a new project? The top priority is talk to the expert. Whatever you want to do, you want to identify who is the expert. Talk to them. They know a lot of things. They're going to tell you what are the most challenging problems you want to address. If you cannot, you do not have access to the expert, it's okay. You can find the papers from the expert, the videos from the expert. If you cannot do both, talk to your advisor. They're going to find you the expert or the paper of the expert. Okay, so talking to the expert, the caveat here is that you don't want to copy paste, right? You want to put your own things in so you can surpass whatever they told you. So here is the thing: talk to the expert or read the papers of the expert. Okay. I think we talked about this before, but here I want to focus on two things. So when you're writing, you don't always have to be like this, okay? You don't always have to think like an audience. Like when you become like a professor or a couple of years later, you know some, internal rules. So those two internal rules I can think about are those two things. I bet everybody here watched the movies, right? You know which movie is good, which movie is bad. When you are writing papers, pretty much similar. It requires two things. First is you have to know a lot of knowledge. Like if you are an expert about a very specific task, like drinking water, So how to drink water, it's a task, right? If you know that, you know you have to grab a cup, you know, get a liter of water, put it in your mouth, and then slowly lift your cup into a certain position that when the water is gone, you lift the cup more. There's a lot of things over there, and then until a certain degree that you feel you don't want to drink more, then you reverse the lift, right? If you know something very well, then you must be able to explain it very well. That's what we see the flow in your brain or in your stomach. So another thing is about the flow of the paper. The flow of the paper means when you are watching the movie, the plot, like the overall structure, how do you want to present the paper? Not every paper can fit in the structure of one background, one problem, 3 related work, 3 techniques, 1 evaluation, 1 conclusion. What I told you at the very beginning is the bigger structure, but the flow of your own paper, you have to tailor it. So you have to come up with a way to do that. That's the flow of the paper. So we see the flow of your stomach and the flow of your paper. These are 2 things that make sure your paper flow well. When the paper flow well, it flows well, right? To everybody's mind. Okay. We talk about writing, reading, and then we talk about presenting right now. So being technical and formal when you're doing research paper presentation, it's not a businessman, so you do not want to brag around and being very informal. Another thing, super important, is facing your audience. Facing your audience is not only to respect your audience, but more importantly, to get feedback from your audience. Well, here, see, if we are able to stay together in a classroom, when I see you guys saying, showing me the impression that you're scratching your head or you figure out it's very confusing in your eyesight, I will just stop my presentation. I will enumerate an example. Some of you attended my class in CP 517, you must notice that, right? When I see students don't react, I will stop. It's the same here. When you're presenting to your peers, if you see your peers showcase some confusion expression, facial expression, then you're gonna have to stop. You get a feedback, you think about it, you either feel you are talking too quick, too fast, or you've been too geeky, you are too much off the ground, they didn't get it, or they are yawning or doing something. It means you have to use some jokes to excite the environment. And this third thing I don't want to share with you, but that's some people keep telling me is that when you have a presentation, it must have this kind of 3 levels. First is all of them can understand the first 30 minutes of your presentation. And then maybe half of them can understand the middle is 25% of your presentation. And another 25%, probably very few of them can understand. That's more things. Well, presentation is very hard work. So there's so many things to talk about. Well, motivating your problem well is definitely very important, because otherwise I'm gonna see, why do I care about it? That's why at the very beginning I'm telling you research is important, right? And indeed, I cannot just cheating or pretending is important. I'm gonna have to find honest fact to support the motivation. So a lot of times, a good presentation need to have a single key message. Like I told you today, the key message is research is repeated search. Reading is those things I talked about, and the writing, finding your fresh audience, and then probably presentation is looking at your audience, right? Right, so many details. So we talk about read, write, present. We're pretty much done. Then some funny things to talk about. So we have the balance and the relax and the work. Right, you can take a look at it. You don't have to always work. You don't have to always relax. Well, for the latter part, you don't have to really always relax because you're gonna feel pretty bored if you keep not working, right? Okay, so research means failures. A lot of times when you get a paper, it's not immediately published. So this is the case I show you here. We submitted a lot of conferences and got rejected a couple of times, and then we got in, right? So when you're writing your papers, you have to be versatile, right? You have to use different techniques, figures, pseudocode, theory, llama. Different moves have different functionalities. You can take a look later about this. I'm supposed to be 30 minutes, so I'm gonna have to be quick. I think this is already being covered. You can take a look later. So it's talking to the expert, talking to the advisor. This is the last slide in case some of you are gonna be a PhD student later. So review a paper. You are reading a paper does not mean you are reviewing a paper. When you are reviewing a paper, which means you decide whether the paper should be accepted. In that sense, typically people are gonna feel, they have the illusion that they are the judge of the paper. But I would say that's not true. Because maybe you are reviewing a paper, you are not an expert about it. And I would say maybe 95% of the time. So you prepare to learn, be a learner instead of a judge. Because you cannot just reject paper because you feel at the first glance you cannot understand it. You have to understand it. And then you have to, in the right font over there, you have to figure out the code that pushes the authors to write a paper. When in another word, the authors write the paper, it means the paper has code. Otherwise, nobody would spend half a year to write 12 pages, right? Think about it. Researchers, that time is very precious, as I told you at the very beginning. If I spend one long period of time, it means I must put something that I feel it's very precious. If you can dig that out and then you evaluate that one to see whether it's acceptable or not, then that's the key for you to review the papers. That's all about it, I think. Any questions? Okay. So I think what we're gonna do is